hand over with Mico. I think this is the usual intro for MOT. So I'm your host. I'm Anthony, Cambridge University Press. And again, this is MoT-PH. MOT is the biggest and the most supportive global software testing community present in 77 cities worldwide, and this is probably more. Okay. And we believe that the more we can get testers coming together, the better we have a chance in terms of improving our industry. So MOT started in Cambridge. For those who don't know, so Cambridge is one of the, well, it considered as a Silicon Fan or a Silicon Valley in UK. So these are the meetup worldwide. Okay, and we only started April 25, 2019. So it's been 2 years when we started this community. It started in Asian Institute of Management, and we are also in social media. So before we start again, so I just like to update you in terms of what has been happening in terms of um, study group. So we started this new event for MOT, the study group. So our for our pilot, we are actually trying to learn Cypress. So our last day for Cypress study group will be on Saturday. This is same time 2 to 3 p.m. And of course, before we end this, we officially started a new group. This is Cypress IO User Group Philippines, since we'll be ending our Cypress. So this will continue all those learning with these new groups as well. And so I think this is the schedule of the study group when we posted this. But at this stage, we'll try to resume our study group by August or September. So what we wanted is to improve our study group based from the pilot execution. So what we wanted is to check how we have execute the study group for Cypress before moving on with different technologies. So we'll resume on August or September. So we'll be also preparing the materials prior as well. So probably watch for more announcement about that as well. And also, so this is actually for next month. This is my only chance to talk once I hand it over with Mico. So for next month, this is July 22, 2021. So we have another international speaker, a very popular actually in conferences and author of books. So this is a very first time that we have in MOT Manila, Janet Gregory. So I think for the last year we have Lisa Crispin. Okay, now we will have Janet joining us next month, July 22. Okay, and that is the same time, 8 to 9 p.m. And also, this is a new announcement as well that we have um, few people who have signed up for to be volunteer of MOT. So you will see new faces, new contents and more events soon. Okay, so we'll have our second meeting on Saturday as well for those who have volunteered. So to really to improve the content, the quality of this community as well. So watch out for those new faces. So you might not see me more in terms of this meetup. I'll be doing other things like on the study group or other things. There could be different facilitator of this monthly meetup as well. So you will see now different faces as well. And lastly, this is a very shameless plug as well for me. So for the last 6 months, I've been working with Janet and Lisa to bring Agile Testing Fellowship in Manila. So I'm now an official instructor of Agile testing fellowship. So I'll be probably starting soon to introduce this course in Manila very soon. Okay, so I just have accepted the contract. Now it's been really more than 8 months of in the making, no, to be part of this team. This is actually an international, so there are been working with different countries, and this is the first time for Philippines as well to have this course as well. Okay, and yes, I'd like to bring you to Miko to talk about re-envisioning the QA role.
All right. Thank you, Anthony. Should I share my screen now?
Yeah, sure, please.
Okay. Hold on. Um, is it okay, Anthony? Is it shown?
Yes, yeah.
Yep. All right. So, guys, good afternoon. Thank you, Anthony, for having me tonight to talk about our learnings when it comes to agile software development, especially with the angle of quality for the QA professionals. So we have here, it's what we call a Morph development framework. Later on, you'll see why it is called Morph, right? It's a little framework that we have been using for quite some time. Um, Over the course of several years, maybe 6, 7, 8 years, I guess, through several organizations already. I would also like to, what they call that, Lisa, Crispin, I missed that last one. When was it, Anthony? Was it 2 months ago? Right? But you
Mm,
guys shouldn't miss the next one because Lisa and Janet really, especially their book, Agile Testing, uh, the one that I consider one of the best, if not the best, book for agile quality, and also of course the equally impressive more agile testing, the second one, right? So it's really very fun to read, and there's a lot of things to learn. Actually, a lot of the concepts based our learnings, a lot of the learnings actually came from the concepts from Lisa and Janet's book, right? So okay, so before we start off with everything, I would like to ask you guys. Let's have a little what do you call this? A little survey. I want you guys to go to menti.com and just enter the code 941511, and I want you to type in what are your pain points right now. What are your challenges? This one. What are your challenges or pains currently when it comes to software development? So I just want to hear it from you guys right now. Oh, you don't have to elaborate that much. You just can type one word, 2 words, a phrase, or anything. So let's have it. Maybe let's give it 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Ooh, the developer requirements. Yeah, it's a lot of requirements I'm seeing here. Little to no requirements. Requirements. QA is not a focus. Too much work, bugs, changing priorities. Smelly code base. That's fun. Unclear requirements. There's really a lot about requirements, right? Automation. Client. QAR bottleneck. Ah, it's a classic problem. What else do we have here? Prioritization, prioritizing, of course. Coding strategies. So far we have combination of requirements, prioritization, something about the developers having, uh, I guess, poor coding strategies, smelly code base. Um, the culture, right? When it comes to the QAs, all right. Good, good, cool, 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 cool. All right. So, everyone, are all the answers in? Okay. Couple of seconds left. No QA team in the organization. Gray areas. All right. All right. Okay. So thank you guys. Let me shift back to. Uh, is it? Okay. All right. Okay. So thank you for all your answers. The reason why I asked about your current pains and problems, it's because the learnings that we have with our development process, it is actually it started with solving a problem, right? Like most things, like most products, like most processes, it always starts with a certain problem that you want to solve. Now, this framework or this development process is not actually a replacement of any methodology that you are currently using, right? It actually complements whatever framework you are using, right? You'll see later on what I'm talking about. And if you guys are familiar with the 12 principles of Agile, so we're not here to talk about those. Some of the following problems that I'm going to discuss, these are actually the common ones that the 12 principles of Agile are trying to solve. But it's there, but we don't usually pay attention to them. So let's see, what are those? Um, so one is that early, frequent, and short time scale delivery often means just do it fast, right? How many of us here have experienced this dilemma? That the company or the firm wants an agile transformation, and then all of a sudden they just expect people to do things very quickly, right? Probably a lot of us. I think it's a very common scenario, right? It's like we are not agile today, and then tomorrow we start the transformation. Then all of a sudden you expect people to code faster, to test faster, right? And in Filipino, aka mabilisan, right? So we all know that real agility is not about being fast. It is actually it's the feedback that we want to be fast, right? So speed is just a byproduct of this concept, right? It is through meaningful feedback that we get to deliver better value as early as we can. So that's why we think of the process as it's fast. No, but it's not actually about coding faster or testing faster, right? So this is one of the problems that we were trying to solve back then. Um, and then, of course, I'm sure everybody has seen have seen already this image, right? Um, the funny graphic about um, the CEO explaining what we want to build, and then the guys in marketing advertising it as something else, and then the developer coding it something else. But the user, or let's say the company, what we really need is something very different from what everybody have already explained before us, right? So everyone has their own interpretation of what is important. So just like you guys have entered in the word cloud, it's like the prioritization, it has to be also one thing, right? And then this one is all too common as well. It's when the agile principle said that we should support each other. But what is usually happening is that we are supporting the ones with the same roles, right? It's like we're creating silos within the team, right? It's like, um, for example, if let's say a certain developer is not good with a certain technology, let's say React, right? What usually happens is that the developers are teaching um, that developer to get better, right? So there's nothing wrong with that. If let's say there is a QA that is, let's say, not good with Selenium, or let's say Cypress, right? Or some other QA skill like cross-browser testing or whatever. It's also the QAs that is supporting that QA, right? In order for that one to be, to upskill the QA. But real agility, it's about crossing those boundaries. It's about breaking these silos, right? So later on, we're going to discuss more about this one, how we are breaking that silo when it comes to this process. Oh, by the way, now if a developer, say, is not testing very well, because I saw in one of the responses you have there something about the coding, right? About poor strategy with the code base, smelly code base and stuff. I would assume also the developers are also poor at testing. There's even an entry there that says developer, right? So when that happens, what we don't usually help, from what I've seen with the different teams. If a developer is not good at testing, we just don't we just ignore it, right? If a QA is poor at testing, we help QAs help QAs. If a developer is poor at, I don't know, JavaScript or React, the developers help him. But if the developer doesn't know how to test, s- nobody's helping, right? So later on, we'll see that one, how we solve that problem. This one is one of my favorites. Um, this is actually the problem that, like, is the main catalyst why we had the experiments that we had before. This is the catalyst of the formulation of this framework, right? Because in our observation, in our experience, usually um, teams and organizations, uh, we usually treat the symptoms of the problems rather than understanding what is the real cause and attacking that cause, right? Like, for example, if you missed a deadline, sure, next time you'll probably solve it by adding more buffer. You got a bug in production, the next time you'll probably just add more layers of testing. You have an unexpected um, test case result in a different environment. Next time you're just going to run the test cases multiple times, and you'll just add layers and layers and layers of testing, hoping that you'll just catch them later on. Right? But we usually fail to realize that most of these problems are actually self-inflicted, right? And then we just want to solve what is obvious, which is the first level problem, which is just the symptoms, not the real cause. Right? So we often resort to band-aids, right? And then this one, um, it's like we all understand what is quality, right? Like, for example, we have a planning, and then we say, okay, we need this item to be of high quality. Someone says hello, someone says hola, right? Someone says uh, some other language, but we all mean high quality. But um, after we have already, what they call it, when we are already at our own domains, right? When the developers are coding, when the QAs are doing the test plans, etc., then comes the problem wherein we have different, somehow, understanding of what needs to be done, of what high quality means, right? So that's why it comes as a surprise with everyone, especially when the user, when they come to use the product. It's really very different from what they are expecting. Okay. um and this one, I think, is one of the most common problem of all. It is very prevalent even nowadays, even with a lot of people doing agile, right? It's they Usually we are more focused about the form, right, rather than the spirit of agility. We are too conscious about the structure and the terms. Right? Most of us think, just because we have the ceremonies and the titles and the terms, that we already consider ourselves as agile, right? We often forget what really the spirit of agile is, right? It is more important to live the concept of agility, and not subscribe to the forms or to the terms, rather than having the form but you don't have the spirit, right? um, let's say, for example, what we are usually doing is that when we want an agile transformation, what we do is to pick a framework, right? Usually it's Scrum, right? And then we follow the guide with all the rules and ceremonies, but we don't really put emphasis on what agile really is. We just think that, okay, we have sprint here, let's have a 2 week sprint. We have someone who's called the Scrum Master, we have someone who's called the product owner. Okay, we're agile. That's usually what happens, right? So the form is actually just the product of living the spirit, of living the concept of what agility is, right? So, like with this like comic strip, right? So they decided to have a stand up, and they think that's the root cause. Once we have the stand up, because um, because a lot of agile teams are doing it, and then it solves all our problems, right? Okay, and this one is my most favorite of all the problems that we have seen. This is my favorite of all time. It's the developers throwing their work over the wall and then just praying that everything will be okay. So how many of us have this kind of uh, culture or problem? I would assume maybe most of us, if not all of us, right? Uh, how often do we see the situation where on Monday you code, but let's say on Monday a developer is coding, nobody knows what he's doing, right? Nobody knows, like literally nobody knows. And then comes Tuesday, and then comes Wednesday, Thursday, and now the QAs come in on Friday. They test, and now you pray that everything just holds and nothing breaks. You know, as a developer early in my career, I experienced this as well. You know, you code, you've been sitting with a QA for, you know, side by side for 4 days. Then all of a sudden, come Friday, the QA test, and it's like it's really like totally different from what you are expecting, right? So it's related to, remember the hello Ola slide that we have back then, wherein we all have different understanding of what quality means for a certain task, but we just have this big wall between the developers and the QAs, and then we just throw it over the wall and just hope and pray that everything will be okay. So now let's go to, so extending the agile principles, like what I said, this little framework of ours is, it's not something that should replace. So you can either be using Scrum, you can be using Kanban, you can be using whatever it is, but this should complement whatever that you're using. So we're just extending the principles. So let's discuss the four main difference in terms of how it is traditionally done versus how it is done in this process. So first, this one actually, I believe most of the teams right now is already doing this. It is involving the QAs, um, but earlier in the process, right? So in the Morph framework, it is shift left. I believe you guys are, we're not here to discuss what shift left is, but I'm sure you guys are very much familiar with what the shift left strategy is. So shift left is very central to this concept, right? So we try to push all the activities, the efforts further to the left of the process rather than catching everything at the end. So what we want is to have end-to-end quality versus the traditional safety net, wherein the QAs are just used as a safety net, wherein we do everything that we want, and then here comes the QA and just, you know, try to find whatever you guys can find. So we're not doing that one. So we are literally transforming them from safety net or quality police to quality champions. Actually, quality champion, this is actually, if you have read um, Janet and Lisa's books, it's a very, what I call this, strong concept that they have been discussing there. Right? Okay, and the next one, Um, hold on. Oops, sorry. The next one is expectations based order of prioritization of tests. I saw this in when we started. Some of you guys have entered something about the prioritization. Um, in our development framework, what we do is that when we have test cases, you try to sort them according to priorities, right? So the basic idea is that what you are testing right now at this moment or at this hour, it should be more important than the ones that you are going to test later, right? Because the truth is, you can formulate an infinite number of test cases for a given system. I think this is also pretty much discussed a lot in the agile testing by Lisa and Janet. But the problem is that time is not infinite. So you guys have also mentioned that one in the beginning, not enough time. So we have to make sure that the test cases being executed are the most important ones according to the context of time, right? Take any task, take any system, and if I give you a certain amount of time, let's say 1 week, you will be able to produce a number of test cases, right? If I give you 2 weeks, you will still produce a certain number of test cases. Because the point is, writing test cases can be, up to infinity. You can think of a lot, but the problem is you have to take time into consideration. You have to take that context of time, right? So how many times have we seen critical bugs in production? Then you wonder in retrospect, like how you wish you could have just spent more time to test that area rather than the hours you have spent on other less important test cases, right? So what we want is we want to sort those test cases from the most important to the least important. That way, if you only have, let's say, 8 hours, you have a boundary, you have an alignment with the team that, okay, this is only the test cases that we can do given the amount of time that we have. Now we should be aligned. Okay, we will not be able to do this. We will not be able to do that. Is this more important than this one, or is this more important than that one? Right. So you have to create an alignment because actually the not enough time concept, it's actually just based on alignment, right? Because like what I've said, the number of test cases can go to infinity, right? So you can actually exaggerate that part, but literally it can go to infinity. So central to this concept also is what we call the risk-based testing. So we're not here to discuss a lot about risk-based, but I'm sure you guys are very much familiar with that one because when it comes to risk-based, so that's the biggest factor when it comes to sorting the prioritization of the test cases. So you would have to consider the probability and the impact, right, of a defect happening. And then the ones that are with the highest risk should go first, right? And then you cut it somewhere and say, this is only all the time that we have. And then are we good with this, right? If everyone says, I don't think we should not include the ones at the bottom, then okay, what are we going to do? Are we going to rearrange the test priorities, or are we going to um, increase more time? Are we going to lessen the hours of our sleep, right? So something's got to give, right? So it's about prioritization. Now, um, this one, this is the next two differences. These are the two biggest difference in terms of the what we call the traditional way of doing things versus how we are doing it with this process. Um, the first one is that this process is radically iterative down to the task level. So we are very much familiar with, let's say, Scrum. Let's take Scrum as an example. We're very much familiar with how Scrum is at the iteration level, like at the sprint level, right? Now, what we do um, is that take all the advantages and the strengths of a sprint of what Scrum is, and like if you guys are familiar with fractals, right, and put it in a smaller scale, like for a certain task or story. So later on, when I show you the process in a nutshell, you'll see how what I'm talking about in terms of how radically iterative the process is, right? Um, and then this one, this is why it is called Morph, right? The central idea about this development framework actually is more of a cultural shift. Um, it is actually based on the idea that, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. Like the ones that um, you said earlier, that you have a lot of problems with the developers and the code base, right? So now what we're doing in this framework is that the QAs, the roles and responsibilities of the QAs are radically transformed or morphed, from a test first approach to a coach first approach, right? So imagine that you combine it with shift left and everything that we have discussed um, this far. So under this framework, the role and responsibilities of the QAs, they are going to be quality supervisors first, like quality coaches first, and then testers second, right? So you are not, the role, the responsibility is not primarily about how good you are individually when it comes to testing, but rather how good as a coach you are. How good are you with supervising the test activities of the team, right? So now it is not that the QAs are not testing, right? So again, it depends on, there are several variations I have seen through the years. It depends on the context of the team. It may be based on the skills, the composition of the team, the level of maturity, right, and how good the guys are with testing, right? But it's not that they're not testing, it is just that there's a shift, in the focus when it comes to the role and responsibilities of the QA, right? So now, this is why we were able to do this. I remember you guys said bottleneck. Is that right? You said bottleneck earlier. One of the problems. This is an example of a bottleneck, right? You have one, two, three, four, five. How many? Five. Yeah, you have five developers depending on one QA. Right? So ideally, in a traditional setup, what we want is to have that ratio as low as possible, right? So that it is more manageable. We want, if we have it our way, probably we'll have one developer is to one QA, right? So that it's more manageable. But under this framework, under this process, we are transforming this style to this one, right? So now all the QAs using the framework, they are transformed into some sort of a QA lead, right? And then the QA lead is actually supervising all those five developers, transforming them all into QAs. So when we look at a team under this framework, we don't see this. We don't see five devs and one QA, right? We see them as like this one. We see six QAs, one lead, five QAs. So that's how we are morphing their roles and responsibilities. Actually, a very good example with this one right now, what we have with Realtair. Recently, we just had a town hall today. We have one of the teams that we have in Realtair. Uh, Maybe he's here. Um, I'm not sure. Shout out to you, Nar. One of the teams that we have in Realtair, there's a developer to QA ratio of 10 is to 1, right? That is the highest dev to QA ratio that I have seen in the years that we have been using this framework is 10 is to 1. Now, actually, it went to as high as 12 is to 1 with 10 regular employees and 2 interns. Now, imagine, and then that one QA that they have is actually a junior QA. It's not even a senior QA, right? He's been a QA for just a little over a year, right? So he's a very junior QA, but he is handling 10 developers. If in a traditional sense, you would think, how 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 are you going to handle that? How are you going to do that? Right? One QA, 10 developers. It's a nightmare. It's a bottleneck nightmare, right? But even with such ratio, he was able to make all those developers better at testing. Actually, he was even awarded today as the rockstar employee rockstar for Realtair. So because of all the amazing work that he's been doing. Um, Also, the amazing thing about it also is that the winner of the award, the Rockstar Award, before him is one of the developers that he is, like supervising the testing with, which is really awesome to see the developer winning that award and now the QA, right, handling 10 develop. It's really crazy. And then um, even with 10 developers, even with supervising the test activities for 10 developers, uh, that QA even doing automation for us. So imagine how how was he able to find the time to do that? You won't be able to have the time to do that if you're in a traditional setup, right? But using this framework, we were able to do that because he is not actually testing physically, manually, um, all the work of those 10 developers. Instead, he is supervising, he is teaching the test techniques, he is teaching um, what they call this, he's giving feedbacks, insights as to how the developers are testing it themselves. So that way he was able to transform 10 developers into 10 QAs. Right? So now, this is I'm going to explain to you the process in a nutshell. I'm not going to discuss um, like there's a lot of variations with this one. It depends on how um, again the maturity and the skill level of the organization, the culture as well. Um, but this one is just to show you what is the core idea with the process. So now it's this one, right? So we started with the kickoff, right? The kickoff, it's again, it's like a sprint planning. That's why I told you it's radically iterative. We're taking the concept of the sprint from of Scrum from the sprint level down to the task level. So imagine this is a task or a story, right? So we kick it off. Now the purpose of the kickoff is to properly signal the start of the work so that you can have an alignment when it comes to the milestones and an alignment in terms of um, what they call this prioritization, right? And your understanding of what needs to be tested, even though most likely at this point you have already discussed that during sprint planning or whatever planning that you might have before. So and then you proceed to, if you can see, code plus test. It's not just code, right? This is where most of the magic happens, right? It is the developer doing the code and the testing himself, right? And then the QA acts as the guide, and of course the BA comes in from time to time. um, so now you have the demo. We do the demo whenever the developer reaches a certain milestone as agreed upon. But as a rule of thumb, what we do is that you should have a demo at least once a day, right? So you don't let the day go by without showcasing what you have already done to the team. The more frequent the demo is, the better, right? Now it is like the sprint review. Right? If we take the concept of of Scrum and the sprint, it's like the sprint review. So we get the feedback. Now, what have we missed? What have you tested? Are we still all aligned about what quality is? Are we still aligned about what the requirements are? Are we still aligned when it comes to the time that we need in order to complete? this what I call this task, right? And then those feedback now further strengthens the test cases. But the test cases are actually owned by the developer. It's not owned by the QA, right? The QA drives the process. The QA helps the developer come up with strong, meaningful, and well prioritized test cases. But it is the developer's responsibility to execute those test cases. So it goes on and on, like um, like in a sprint, like in Scrum. So we iterate. So first milestone, you can look at it as the first sprint, and then another sprint up until you are finished. So now, um, when you are done, so let's say you started on a Monday, you have a demo later on today, then comes Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. When you're done, by the time that you have your last demo, it should be, well, some of the teams, it should be production ready already, because by that point, well, if you're that good, there's nothing more to test. If you have done all these, what do you call this, iterations, the feedback loops, if you have done it pretty well, you should be okay. But as an additional layer, especially if you guys are new to this specific shift, um, there's a side-by-side exploratory test by the QA and the developer. Take note, if you can see, there's no throwing over the wall here. Um, the developer and the QA are doing the exploratory test side by side. Right? So this is the process in a nutshell. So there's a lot more nuances and specifics when it comes to the different variations of the process, but we're not going to discuss it here. But all of those variations are still based on the core concept of, you know, the morph, right? Morphing the QA, having the presence of the QA from end to end. Actually, of course, before that, there's like the requirements gathering and, you know, the product road mapping, etc., where the QA is also involved. So everything is still based on the four main differences, principles that I have explained prior. Right now, so sorry. So now, what are the advantages, right, of this one? Obviously, number one is it promotes end-to-end quality, because, of course, the QA is present like from Monday to Friday. The QA is giving feedback every day, if not every half a day or every hour, if you can. So they are not just there waiting for stuff to get thrown over the wall and get tested, right? They are really present along the way, all every step of the way. And then, so if you notice, in that process, the the process doesn't let the developers, right, throw items over the wall, and they don't allow the developers to move into another task. Because traditionally, what we do, like the developer, I code it Monday to Thursday, and then Friday I throw it over the wall and I start a new one, right? That's the traditional way. But with this process, with this framework, the developer sticks with the task from the beginning to end, right? He never leaves the task. He's the one doing the code, test, demo, review, feedback, code again, test again, feedback, code, test again, and then exploratory side by side. We do this together, and then we close. And then I move on to the next task. So it gives a developer not extreme, like a good focus on what he is really doing, right? So it avoids switching of tasks, which often leads to waste and defects, right? Um, what else? Of course, because of the very iterative nature and the involvement of the QA and the shift left strategy as well, we are going to catch issues as early as possible, right? Because the process really gives you higher chances of catching it earlier than what you are used to, you know, the traditional way, right? So you have the chance to catch it on a Monday rather than on a Friday, right? And of course, it breaks the silos, right? And it creates constant alignment, because again, because of the iterative, radical iterative nature, and of course the morphing of the responsibilities. So I don't know if forced is a good term to use, but you as a QA, as a quality professional, you are forced to collaborate with everyone, right? Because you are not just a QA right now, you're practically a QA lead of a team of QAs. A dev is a QA, the DBA is a QA, the architect is a BA, is a QA. So you are the QA lead of an entire team of QAs, right? So compared to the traditional sense wherein if a QA finds more what they call this, defects or bugs, it, usually we say that that QA is good, right? But in this process, actually, the less bugs that we find, that means the QA is doing his job pretty well, right? Because that means all the defects are catched to the left, like shift to the left, like earlier in the process, like unlike later on in the process. So ideally, when you come to the exploratory testing stage, it should be optional, right? Well, at least that's the idea. If you are really religiously doing the feedback loops, right? You should come to a point, especially when the developers and the QAs are, there's a high level of trust and skill level that you don't need certain layers later on. And of course, this is also quite obvious. It transforms the QAs from quality police, right, to quality champions. So they are not here to police. They are now here to make the entire team better when it comes to testing. So we literally, the QA is literally multiplying himself or herself like into many other QAs, right? So rather than being just good individually and just like being a police and catching bugs and stuff, right? So we amplify the value of the QAs and his skills or her skills with the team. So of course it's not without its risks and hindrances. um, uh, One is, of course, there are psychological birth pains, especially when you are, when you have started to try a radically different process like this one. Is that one is, of course, some of the guys felt like there's a slow development time. Some of the developers might even say there's more work for us devs, but actually they are just doing things that they should have been doing before. It is just that if your culture is not so, what they call this, quality sensitive, is that the right term to use here? um, they feel like they do not have the responsibility to do the test. They feel like it's somebody's responsibility, it's not mine. But the point is, quality is everyone's responsibility, especially with the developers, right? Because they're the source of the codes. So there's also a feeling of low quality because they feel like, oh, I'm not really good at testing. Now I'm testing, so I feel like it's low quality. And of course, with some QAs, they feel like there's a lack of control, right? And a lack of trust. Like I don't feel like I trust you guys enough. I still need to test everything. Like I need to see it myself. Right? I cannot trust your test cases even if it says passed. I still need to execute that even though I will just do the same thing that you did, right? Which is, well, in terms of lean, that's basically a waste, right? It's just because you're just repeating what had already been done and you know not expecting a different result, right? So now if you are doing that because of a different problem in terms of trust, now that's a different problem altogether that you need to solve. So you should not solve, again, you should not treat the symptoms and create layers, but instead you should solve the root of the problem, why you do not trust the output of your colleague, right? So, and then of course, this is all too classic, this one, because non-QA professionals they don't feel like they need to test, like what I mentioned in the previous slide. It's either because it's cultural, right? Like the culture of the company, they see quality as the sole responsibility of the QAs or the QA team or the QA group, right? So if that's a culture of the company, it becomes a hindrance in terms of doing this process. right? And then if there's lack of alignment with the expectations of the role, and of course it's going to be a hindrance as well. And this is what this one's a little bit, it's not nice to hear, but there are just people who are lazy to test, right? Which is sad, but it is true that there are some people out there that they just are, they are just too lazy to test. They feel like, ah, let's say Anthony is a good QA, right? So Anthony is going to catch everything. Why should I bother, right? So, the, that's the truth. There are some like that because they are too dependent with the QA, especially if QA is good. So it tolerates what they call this mediocrity in terms of how they are testing their work. Now, and then of course, there are just some organizations or teams that are, just not ready to embrace a cultural shift, right? They are not ready to explore the idea of what if the developers are good with testing? What if the BAs are good with testing? What if everyone is good with testing, right? I just want the QAs to test. I just want the QAs to be the ones who's catching everything. I I want to depend on them, right? And I just want them to be like a safety net, right? To be at the end of the process and just test everything and catch whatever issues you can. Right? So if you can't let go of the traditional mindset, of course, it's very difficult to try it out. You're going to have a lot of what they call this barriers in terms of executing, right, and alignment. Yep. So, oh, I we have time. Um, so guys, I open it up for questions. Anthony.
Yes, yeah. I think Janet should catch up next month for all those
Yeah.
questions. Okay, so let's start. I think there are quite very interesting questions in Slido, so I could probably start with I think these are pretty much a good question. Is it there a bias in having that the dev test their work?
Yes, I was actually expecting that question. It's a question that's been asked a lot through the years. Of course, there's going to be bias, right? That's why I said it's not actually that the QAs are going to be like, it's like they won't care, right? It's not like they will not be there, right? It is like the QAs will act like their little conscience when it comes to testing. So you can still influence the in terms of bias, in terms of psychological bias when it comes to the developers testing. It we are If you look at it this way, you are basically outsourcing the work from yourself. Instead of you executing it yourself, you are outsourcing the work to the developer. So that's why it speeds up the process because there's no more bottleneck. But you're still there to review the test cases, right? And you are still there in terms of the demos. You get to see what's the progress, what has been done, right? So that's how you minimize the bias when it comes to the testing. And then it
Oh,
later on it will create a more, what they call this, trusting environment when it comes to the developers. And then you can also take your vacation, like what Grenar did.
okay. So I'll just try to summarize some of the question and
Sure, sure.
combining it since we are very short of time. But this is interesting in a way that how would it be um, we know that one of the strengths of the QA is it can see different areas because of testing in an end-to-end perspective. It actually one of the strength it knows the product well.
Yes.
Um, Comparing with a with from the experience, developer were always put on a modular basis, so they really didn't understand the integration of different components. Pretty much that's the idea. So how will it affect the testing, since the developer doesn't see it only see modular, it doesn't see the whole system?
Actually, that's a very good question because the answer is all the more reason why you shouldn't sit on the other side of the wall. Because the developer is seeing things modularly if they're sitting on the other side of the wall and we don't know what he's doing, and then the QAs are on the other side and then the developers throw the output over the wall. That's the reason why we are bringing down that wall, so that the QA should be involved right at the very beginning during the kickoffs, the demos, the milestones, the review of the test cases, because you should, what I call this, again, what I call this, you should be able to morph. You should be able to pass on that skill to the developer. Because if we leave the developer with that mentality of that modular mentality and just we just catch it later on, then it's really going to be a problem, right? So that's all the more reason why you need to do those iterations, those demos. That's really very important and insightful,
Okay.
because that is where you're going to raise the, oh, you're thinking modularly, blah blah
Okay.
blah.
And that leads to another question that given its higher cost, I mean the developer, well, costs more, then it will be a reduction to their velocity and output if they're still gonna try those, how to extend the testing is, since you have to go out from a modular mindset. So the other side of the thing, it will cost more because you're pretty much slowing the development because of those things.
Again, that's a psychological birth pain, like what I explained a couple of slides ago. Now, that the way to look at it is actually these things, like testing it more, right? Not in a modular way, is actually something that the developer should have been doing. Don't you agree?
Okay.
Right? I mean, they should be testing it thoroughly,
Yeah.
right? Because it's their code, it's their
Yeah.
output,
Okay.
right?
Okay, Miko, I just need to continue in terms of on that question, because there is a important phrase that how then you get the buy-in of the management, uh, especially that doing well, pretty much slowing the development in terms of building or creating stories or developing stories, and how you're able to get the buy-in of the management about.
Yeah, well, number one is that you should be able to look at it from a perspective that it's not actually there to slow things down, right? You should explain it clearly, what the process is and what the shift is all about, right? Because actually the idea of the process is not to slow things down, right? If you can see, there's no bottleneck, right, in the process, and there's no back and forth, right, over the wall. It is basically one straight and smooth process, right? So when you're trying to get the buy-in of the management, you should look at it at the perspective of the cost of catching issues later down the stream, right? Because the later you catch an issue, that's why I mentioned that the shift left idea is very important in this process, because the later you catch a defect, it's more expensive, right? So what we want is to catch and provide insights when it comes to those issues early on in the process.
So before I ask this question, I need to ask this question. Do you started the process from the scratch, or is it something that you transform from a traditional, from the usual setup of a QA developer to this process?
It just actually started with the idea of seeing what they call this, like a scrum versus waterfall, right?
Okay.
Because right now, what is happening in terms of task execution is actually very waterfall, right?
Okay.
Usually, even if you are under an agile framework, let's say, even if you're doing Scrum, but the way we are executing the stories, it's very waterfall. You have the requirements, someone codes, someone tests, right? It's actually waterfallish. So when we saw that and we were trying to experiment how to do it better, we realized why not do it like how the sprint is working, how Scrum is working, and put it down at the task level.
So then this is the question actually is, and then how do you then now integrate those stakeholders, or probably the QA or the developer to buy in this process?
Uh, how we do that? Well, number one is that you just have to talk about the advantages. Are we talking about the buy-in of the
Yeah, yeah,
stakeholders
yeah,
and the
yeah,
developers? Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
the buy-in.
Well, one is that the developers are going to have more focus, right? And it's also in terms of skills, it will be very good for them because now we are building not just devs but dev QAs, right? So in terms of the developers, it's well, the advantage is very huge for them. So they get to focus on one task at a time. They get to have more skills in terms of testing. And now in terms of the stakeholders, they get to see earlier feedbacks about a certain task,
With
right?
with with this, Miko, who are those the most difficult to convince to buy in on this process? Is it the stakeholder, the QA, or the developer, or
Actually,
probably could tell more stories about that? Who's the one who's actually okay? Let's do it. So those
actually,
things.
sometimes it's the QA themselves.
Okay.
Sometimes it's the leadership of the
Uh,
QA, right? It's sometimes it's hard to get the buy-in, especially if the leadership of the QA, or let's say the leadership of the company,
okay.
whenever they really see that the QAs are just there to test and
Okay. Okay.
just there to catch, like a safety net. That that barrier is the one that is really difficult to overcome,
Okay.
right?
And who's the one who's really interested to experiment this process? I mean,
Actually,
who's yeah.
it's the stakeholder.
It's a stakeholder. Okay, so I start with a stakeholder, I guess, because that's pretty much some of the question. So then I'm leading to this question. What are those tips that you actually can advise to get the buy-in of the stakeholder?
Actually, not stakeholders when it comes to customers and stakeholders when it comes to management. They are,
Okay,
uh, in my experience, they are the easiest ones because
okay,
these guys they usually like the idea of having that quick feedbacks. Right.
okay,
I want to know what has been done on a Monday. I want to know what has been done on a Tuesday and a Wednesday, rather than knowing later on,
okay.
which is the whole concept of the iterative development of Agile, right?
Okay, I could probably have three more questions, so
Sure,
I'll
sure.
go straight to the point of the question. I hope I was able to ask your question or rephrase that so that Miko can answer. Is it too much for developers to do testing a lot, especially if you are in a Scrum process? At,
One, yeah. Like what I said in the risk and hindrances. Now, if the developers are of what they call this, some of them they really don't feel like it's their responsibility to test. Now, what I always say to the developers who are a bit not comfortable at the beginning, of the adoption of this process, like if you don't have a responsibility to test, then how do you ensure that what you're coding is correct? Once you ask the developer that question, you'll be surprised about the answers, right? You'll get different answers and you will be like, okay, so if you don't want to test, how how are you going to ensure that what you're coding is right? Like it's like that's impossible. How are you going to, right?
okay,
How are you
so
going to
I'll just move on to the next question. Sorry, I need to make it faster.
sure, sure, sure.
I think there are some question here. Unit testing, which is probably a test that is being done by the developer.
Correct.
So, are they still doing unit testing or not?
Yes. They are
Okay.
still doing this.
Okay. So on top of this idea, they're still doing the unit testing.
Correct.
Okay. So I think that could probably how extended the framework greatly impact the QA team. Did this make this QA happy?
Well, like what I said a while ago, you can take more vacations and not worry about things burning down. Yes, yes, it made them happy. It made them more central to the development, if anything. It made them more valuable because now they're not just testing, but they're also testing and coaching, supervising basically. Each QA is a lead.
Okay, so I think there are a couple of questions that I can see. Probably, what are the challenges of shifting this framework? So, pretty much for you, what is something that you feel that is one of the challenges of having this kind of routine or framework?
Yeah, well, aside from the buy-in from the management, right?
Yeah.
That's a little bit difficult. It's what I call the skill level of the developers and let's say the BAs. It's their skill level when it comes to the different techniques in terms of testing, because um, when you try to adopt the process and then the rest of the team are not really equipped enough, you're going to have a hard time at the beginning, like really a hard time. That's why I said there are a lot of different variations that I just did not discuss. I just discussed the core concept. A lot of different variations when it comes to the process. It is because some teams they have less in terms of the skills and abilities of the developers. So that's the most difficult part.
Okay, so I think there are still a lot of questions, and apology if I'm not able to ask the question, or probably Miko can answer those questions. Do you have I mean, where they can reach out to you,
Okay.
yeah,
I
so that
think
they could probably
you can
ask you.
reach me in through LinkedIn. I think I'm the only one like Mico Alcanse. I don't think I have someone else with the same name. So you'll most likely find me very easily.
Okay, so that's very well engaging to be honest. There's so much
Feel free.
question.
Feel free
Yeah.
to just send it, and I'm more than happy to answer those.
Okay, and yeah, and it was really good when you started that uh, the stakeholder is always looking for a quick feedback.
Yes.
So which is a really nice. So but with I think with we almost extended 10 minutes, and again thank you so much, Miko,
Yeah.
for having you in MoT-PH, and I hope to see you again. So
Sure, of
see
course, of
what's
course.
yeah,
Hopefully, I don't miss the next one with Lisa.
yeah, it's with Janet actually.
It's with Janet. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So thank you so much, and I guess I think we could just publish uh his link in our site, I
Ah,
guess.
sure,
For those,
sure.
yeah. Okay, so thank you so much, everyone, for spending your night with us. Thank
Thank
you,
you, guys. Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you.
Anthony. Thank
thank
you,
you,
Thank
guys.
you.
thank you,
Thank you,
Johnny.
Miko.
Thank you.
Thank you.